As a kid, I sat with an ear close, just listening.
I am extremely excited and honored to be joined today by someone who is one of my biggest cheerleaders, and it means the world. She supports everything I do. My mom is a lawyer. She's also a lawyer, so I call her like my second brain tumor mom. I had the opportunity to get very close with her son, Grace Wethor, while we worked on pediatric cancer legislation in Washington, D.C., as well as pediatric cancer advocacy work. Can you please introduce yourself to the audience and a bit about your story and how you ended up in the place we are today?
Absolutely. You are right. I am honored to be your second mom, always, always, and with you in all of this. So my son, Grace Wethor, was just a little bit older than Grace. He was 20, May 17th, 2019, on DIPG Awareness Day when he was diagnosed with DIPG. We'd never heard of DIPG before, which is pretty universally true of anyone who ends up with this brainstem glioma. He had just a little bit of double vision in the peripheral of one eye. He went to an eye doctor, led to a CT scan, led to an MRI, and unbeknownst to us, the most unthinkable thing, an incurable, aggressive glioma in the pons. When he was diagnosed, it was he and I in the room with the doctor, and he said, "You've told me you're the best in Kansas City. You've told me you can't fix this. I will die. I'm just going to need to know how long that I have." And the doctor paused and looked at me, and Jay said, "I know where I'm going when I die. I just need to know how long I have to make an impact." And the answer is 6 to 9 months. And he quickly calculated that would be one day before his 21st birthday. And he did battle much longer than 9 months. He battled 25 months. He was able to take advantage of 2 experimental treatments that I think really helped him. And he did pass away July 3rd of this year of a brain bleed. So not related specifically to the trial, but something that is pretty common in the DIPG tumors. But he did have a chance to make an impact, and like you, took his knowledge to the masses and spoke at the NIH and the White House at a summit with parents that I think was really helpful for many of us. He spoke on many virtual briefings and legislative affairs while the pandemic was going on, and he absolutely lived every day. He wasn't going to let this tumor slow him down. So like you, he kept a smile on his face even through the really hard parts of living with a brain tumor.
100%. I can't agree more. You spoke on it a little bit, but we actually met in Washington, D.C. while fighting for, at the time, HRES 114, and it's now HRES 404. And I know Jace was a huge advocate for that, and as well as other things like the Credit to Care Act and the Accelerating Kids Access to Care Act. Can you speak a bit about the work you guys were doing in Washington, D.C. and kind of that journey to advocacy? I mean, this is a time where most people would probably turn off the lights and put the covers over their head, and I met you guys in the middle of your journey on the front lines in Washington, D.C., fighting for others. You were not thinking about yourselves. And I find that so noble. And I'm curious what that journey was for you, from hospital room to getting on a plane and saying, we have to do something and we have to do it now.
Yeah, well, at the beginning, we only knew this is what he had and that it couldn't be treated in Kansas City. So, we had to go to MD Anderson to just get a true diagnosis in Texas, but that's about all they could do at the time. There weren't trials for 19-year-olds or 20-year-olds, I should say. The trials were ending at 18. So that was a challenge we knew we needed to help change. We next were in New York, hearing about a really good drug that was being used. It wasn't curing the tumor, but it was helping people live a good quality of life much longer. But he didn't qualify because that trial ended at 18. We then were in San Francisco the next week to do a biopsy to confirm what mutations he had in order to know what clinical trials he could possibly have. And the result of that was we knew his mutations, but his doctor simply said, you have the 3 worst mutations you could possibly have, the most aggressive. To which he said, okay, what trial should I do? What would be best? And her answer was, what part of the country do you want to spend time in? What part of the country haven't you seen? Jace was sassy and said, I have a travel agent. I can book my own trips. I need to know what's the best what's the best trial for my tumor and how the heck do I get in it? So to some degree, we did not know that we were running into the challenges we needed to advocate for in those early weeks. But we came to know we absolutely had been able to have access to some of the very best doctors through those few weeks, and still we're having trouble getting into treatments, and that had to change. Jace would always after that say, we have to make it easy enough that a 25-year-old mom with a 4-year-old could find the voice to ask for the same access that I need. And he knew he could speak up and explain what it felt like to be told, you're going to lose your walk, your talk, your swallow, your mobility, but you will never lose the ability to know exactly what's going on. And he knew he could explain that in a way that might resonate with lawmakers. And so just a couple of short weeks after his 6 weeks of radiation, which, as you know, is the only standard of care in DIPT. And it's been the same since 1960. So we know it's not going to take care of it. We've lost thousands and thousands of kids, 400 a year in the US to DIPT since then, and it's not changed. But he knew he had to get busy. And so he was invited to speak at the NIH on the idea of owning your own genomics. I mean, it was odd to me and to him that even if he had a biopsy done, a very invasive procedure, he did not own that tissue at the time, and he did not own the right to send it where he wanted to and the results where he wanted to without massive paperwork. And after his death, it was not his family's to control what happened to it. And so he did speak, and I think it was well received. And one thing we learned when he spoke was there were researchers there that had worked with DIPG cell lines for years, but had never met a patient with DIPG. And the urgency at which they chose to work after that was impacted by understanding his urgency to find a treatment to save his life. When he went on then to speak in legislative offices, I loved how he would start the conversation because he looked so very normal, just like you, Grace. You're beautiful. You look so normal. And yet you battle things every day behind the scenes because of your tumor. And he would just start by saying, we're here to talk about DIPG. Do you know what that is? And the staffers are wonderful for senators and representatives. And as you know, they're not much older than you and Jace. Oftentimes, they're in that 25 to 30-year age range, and they're gatekeepers, right? Well-intentioned gatekeepers for our politicians, but they don't know what DIPG is, just like us, just like we were. So he would say, well, he said, I was just like you. I was pursuing a law degree. I hope to be in politics. I, got good grades, procrastinated too much, partied a little bit too much maybe, but none of that has to do with the fact that I now have 6 to 9 months to live. And there's no treatment available. It's 100% terminal. So I'm here to talk to you about what we can do to change that, because kids deserve more. And it got attention in a way that a bereaved mom or dad does not, because, so many times that looks like a very sad story. But when you see someone, just really at the peak of life, ready to launch a career, to do really exciting, meaningful things like you are, and you hear that he has something that no one has done anything to change in 60 years, he really got some attention. So from that, he found his voice. He found his voice speaking for kids. And, luckily people started listening.
It's amazing. I think they often say that this fight, it's kind of two paths at the same time. It's this path in legislation and our government to get the resources that we need to find a cure. And then it's this path in the scientific world to have these researchers, continue to work on this. And like you said, they had never met anyone actually fighting this tumor. And it is so strange how disconnected these worlds can be. But I believe that for the first time in the past couple of years, we've started to see this community blend so beautifully together. We're seeing advancements in the science side of things, as well as the legislation. And a lot of it has to do with social media and young people in our community like Jace and young people in the science community. We're all coming together, becoming friends, just genuine friends, and
Yes.
like real differences be made because of it, and uniting these communities. It's been so incredible to see. And I'm confident and hopeful to say that I think Jace and what he went through in the trial space was at the forefront of a real change in the DIPG community. We're seeing hope and progress for the very first time. And, they're working on his cells and his tumor. And it is so incredible to see like the start of something. It is truly the start of an incredible phase for this community. It's been so dark for so long, and we're starting to see that speck of light somewhere far off in the distance. I know it doesn't have to directly do with legislation, but if we could take a moment, I would love to briefly discuss the trial that Jace was going through and the incredible work that's being done in Switzerland and Stanford, and how he's at the forefront of this new era.
Yeah, I would love to, because you hit it on the head. That research and patients and doctors, I mean, they all just have to be communicating, right? And I was able to visit Dr. Manji's lab in November, which was so meaningful to me, and see Jace's greatest asset, which he donated to the lab, his brain, at work. And, it was bittersweet, because he took so much pride in his wit and his intelligence. And yet I know so much is being learned. So I got to meet researchers that, again, some of whom are not much older than you, Grace. They're, in that 25 to 35 age range, but they're brilliant scientists. And one thing they discovered from Jace's tumor cells, and I don't want to give too much away because that is Michelle's story to tell, but there was a particular thing happening that we're stopping the cells from sticking around. So Jace was on a CAR T cell trial, which means the process is you take plasma, you take blood from the arm, you return everything with the plasma. The plasma, then they ferret out the T cells, which are just warrior cells that we all have. And they engineer them with a special antigen that goes after a certain protein that's universally on DIPG cells, and it's called GD2. And so these CAR T cells then grow, they're packaged, and then the first dose is administered by IV with some, immune depleting cells. Jace lost his hair, which he absolutely hated, but as his mom, I thought he looked good anyway. But then the second dose goes through an Omaya catheter, which is just like a Nike pump on your scalp, just right underneath your scalp, those old throwback shoes. And then there's a little straw that goes in, much like a stirrer for coffee or a mixed drink. I'm trying to paint the picture because Omaya sounded terribly scary to me, but that's what it is. And it goes into an area called a fourth ventricle that allows the cerebral spinal fluid to flow. And so they can put the cells into that space, and then they cross the blood-brain barrier, they're in there. And what's happening is those T cells go to find that protein that are universally on the cancer cells, and they just start eating away the cells. just eating like Pac-Man, like the old Pac-Man, right? Just going after them. And if we could get them to stick around long enough, they probably eat all the cancer cells, but they die off before the job's done and they have to do another dose, another dose. And while they're eating away, it causes lots of inflammation. So Jace, being early in the trial, he went through everything: super high fevers, confusion, body tremors, sweats, chills. I mean, horrific side effects. But the exciting thing is they learned how to treat all of those side effects so that the patients now that, we're on like patients 7 through 14 now, they're getting a higher dose, but not the same side effects. They get just a mild flu because they learned certain drugs they could use. They also learned they really can't give steroids doing it because it shuts down those cells completely. And only through his tissue did they learn of an extra complication that was really, just fighting the T cells who were fighting the cancer cells. So just in the last couple of months, this wonderful researcher working for Dr. Manji named Becca, who, I would guess is under 30 for sure, and is just full of light and shed tears with me that this was a contribution that Jace would make, discovered that if they gave a certain drug that would deplete this certain thing that's causing the pushback, they could use half the CAR T cells to be as effective. So if they use a full dose of CAR T cells, would that kill the tumor completely? And we're going to find out this next year, because from January on, they're going to be, changing the study up to do just that. But in the meantime, I can share with you that there are kids that have 90% and more tumor reduction. That part hasn't been published yet, so I don't want to share too much of the details, but social media is wonderful because at least one of those individuals is sharing her story. We posted on Jace's page, and that's another change in the DAPG world that I might just quickly speak to, the power of the patients, because when Jace was to sign all the consents, and it's not because they're evil doctors where he was at Stanford or anything like that, quite the opposite. They are amazing and really great friends of ours. But the paperwork said, you can't talk about your experience on social media. You can't talk about the trial. You can't blah, blah, blah. And Jace said, wrong patient. I won't sign that.
Yeah.
And, it was like, what, then we can't do the trial. And he was like, no, I have every right to tell my story from the first day I was born to the last day on earth. I have the right to tell that. And my family has the right to tell my story. And I won't enter into a trial that keeps that from the next patient because this diagnosis is scary enough. And so those items were stricken from the consents. And I don't even think they're in the consents anymore. Each patient in that trial is allowed to tell their story. And so I just put that out there because I think it's important for every family to know you have every right to tell your story. And we're already in a Russian roulette situation when we're picking a trial. We have every right to know who did well, who didn't do well, if they want to share that information.
The world of social media, I think, has been such an incredible factor for this community. I mean, when I was diagnosed, I was told that there was no one like me. And it took me 5 years into my journey before I met Jace. And he was the first kid I had ever met with a tumor in the same area of the brain as my own. And I had met other kids facing brain tumors, but the brain is extremely complicated. It's as different as your hand and your foot. One area of the brain to the next presents different symptoms. It presents different challenges. A lot of, like you said, it leaves you cognitively totally intact. It's these physical issues that you start developing, and a lot of them are not even noticeable to other people. And so having this silent fight that your body is changing and others may not, it's a very isolating feeling. And it wasn't until years into my journey that I ever met someone who had felt the same way. And so I think the power of social media and the way you guys share Jace's story and the way he shared his story is so powerful. And you have continued his work and his advocacy. And now you work on #ToughTogether. Can you speak a bit about the work you do now? I just attended an incredible breakfast in Washington, D.C. for Cure Fest, and you're doing such amazing work for this community. I mean, childhood cancer in general is a community that needs so much help. And then you go down and pediatric brain tumors need so much help. And then, you find this like small community in the corner of people who have fought DIPG, one of the deadliest forms of pediatric brain cancer, and significant portion of the overall childhood death toll comes from DIPG. It's this little community that didn't have a voice years ago, and many people don't know about it until it affects them personally. You speak about the work you guys are doing with Tough Together and what you hope to accomplish in the future as well.
Oh, thank you so much. It would absolutely be my privilege to do that. You are exactly right. Everything you said is what is driving Tough Together, because there is power in togethering, right? There is power in knowing you're not the only one. You feel like, okay, I can ask for that because I'm entitled to it. I should be able to know. You can share stories. You can ask for treatments that aren't being offered to you. Also, the doctors are learning, oh, well, I only had one patient, and I'm just going to pick one, hopefully not too controversial, using CBD that seems to be doing really, really well. But gosh, now on social media, there's like 100 and they're doing better, and maybe we should study that, or you could pick anything, right? So the power of sharing that information, because so many times our stories don't completely get in our records at the doctor's office, and so it never percolates to, we should look at this. And that was what we brought together. Jace, when he was diagnosed, I just said, most people have like a GoFundMe page, a Facebook page for local support, and he was like, I don't want my name all over everything. And in the initial days, and I was like, well, what should we do? And I was like, and he was like, don't be like Jace Ward Warrior or something like that. And I was like, okay. He said, I want to be a normal kid as much as I can be. And I was like, okay. In the end, he settled on Tough Together. He played as number 2 in sports. And so it's just the word tough and the number 2 and then gather. And he just said, if we raise money and we don't need it for my treatment, please, please, please make sure the next kids get it. Make sure it goes to research, make sure it benefits. And so that's what we're doing with that. But along the way, we learned that power of coming together, the emotional uplift, the ability to share resources towards things that would help most, and to share the information. And it was always our desire that it be very accessible, that it not be locked away behind a pay-to-play situation where, only, families that can check the box like ours, a 22-year-old with a lawyer mom who won't take no for an answer, can get the same access. And so we did have the breakfast. And it was just a short time after Jace passed, in conjunction with Cure Fest. And Cure Fest, of course, is in DC. It brings together the entire childhood cancer community. You spoke on the main stage so wonderfully, and I'm sure we'll want you to again. It was fabulous. But we were able to highlight DIPG, which is the deadliest cancer now among all childhood cancers. And we also brought together some of our very best doctors and researchers with a ton of parents, some with kids in the fight, some who have lost children, but are still in the fight for the next children. The parents want to hear firsthand, what are the best opportunities to treat kids with DIPG and adults with DIPG? They also, if they've lost their child, want to hear how they can help the next family. Is it by funding research? Is it by getting kids in their area to those centers? What's the best way? But we also learned that the doctors, and I hadn't really thought about this until the conversations with doctors afterwards, if you choose DIPG to be your specialty, and most every patient you see is DIPG, most of the ending conversations with those families are, I'm so sorry, there's nothing more we can do. That is not a rewarding career, right? That's a very difficult career. So these are extremely caring individuals. They 100% are trying to make a difference and make a cure and make it happen. But it was so rewarding for them to see families they had treated who are now 2, 3, 4, 7, 10 years out come back and want to help the next families. Their lives had continued. There was great loss and great grief, but they got to see that, like the doctors, they were resilient families ready to help the next. And they got to hear how much we appreciate them. So we're going to do it again. It was extremely well received. We planned that one in about 5 weeks. We had about 218 people attend. Everybody says they're coming back. I haven't heard anything bad, but we're going to spread it into a couple of days. So the Friday we'll have lots of breakout sessions, and we'll engage more with legislators and regulators and researchers. And then we'll do the big breakfast, and we'll do some things for all of pediatric brain cancer with some pediatric brain cancer partners. And then we'll probably do some things with all of childhood cancer, like the young adult teen track that you're working on. And we'll also do some bereavement, some emotional support for those in the fight, especially in the AYA space where there just really isn't enough. And then there's some legislation on this, but palliative care standards, because our kids are so many times sent home and with lots of nursing needs, and the standards for in-home care vary widely across the nation. They're different between pediatrics and adults, and it really leaves our kids at a big disadvantage. So lots and lots to work at, but we just keep trying to plug the gaps, make things easier, collaborate, work with others on every single thing.
It's amazing. We're really hitting all of them. We're like science, patient care, and legislation. And I think, like I said earlier, that coming together, it's been incredible to see. Before we go, I am curious if you have any words for people. The first time I met Jace was in Washington, D.C., and I had never spoken in that sort of setting before. I had only ever spoken in a place where I was supposed to be like the inspiration, if that makes sense. And this is the first time, thank you. This is, Washington, D.C. being here. This was the first time I was speaking with a goal in mind and something I had to get done and something I needed to convince people of. And I think it takes a lot of confidence to go up there and try to convince these Congress members and White House staff that I have something worth sharing with you. I think I was 17 or 18 at the time. I was still in high school. And I remember seeing Jace speak first in front of all of these, Congress members and their staff. And he just went up there so confidently. It was like, yeah, no, we need this. Like, no, it's not even a question. Like, we need it and you need to do something about it because that's your job. And seeing that confidence, I tried to take a piece of that in everything that I do now in legislation. Do you have any words for individuals who want to get involved in our government, in legislation, in advocacy in general, about moving forward and becoming an advocate for whatever cause means so much to them?
Well, our lawmakers only know what we're willing to share with them. And if we're not willing to share it, they hear from paid lobbyists whose interests might be very different from our own. Jace's message was DIPG won't wait. There's nothing you can argue about that. It will not wait. And we don't have large pharma lobbyists or others singing that song. But watching someone like yourself or like Jace fight something in their brain, a ticking bomb, whether it ticks the rest of your life like we hope, Grace, or whether it's a shorter amount like Jace faced. There's nothing that spells urgency like that. And so I think your voice is so important. I think you've lived with something that they need to understand, and really only you or a parent, someone in the fight, can really share. And I would just take that with you and speak truth in whatever words you typically use.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Lisa, for taking the time to speak with me today. Your work and support of me and legislation in our community in general means so much. And I'm so happy to have had the opportunity to be here with you today.
Oh, thank you, Grace. It's always a pleasure.